This video is about Father Bernard J. Hubbard, who was more well known as the Glacier Priest. You probably never heard of him, but your great-grandparents or your grandparents probably did. He was extremely famous in the 1930s, but with the coming of the Second World War, he was quickly forgotten. This video will be different than most of my videos since I'm not going to be discussing Catholic teachings here. Instead, I'll present a biographical sketch of a Catholic priest who should be remembered. Father Hubbard was always an athlete and an adventurer. Before he became a priest, he was a cowboy in Montana. He was also a mountain climber. The Catholic Church has long traditions of explorer priests and also of scientist priests. Father Hubbard combined both of these traditions. When Father Hubbard was a young priest in 1923, he traveled to Europe to climb a glacier with an older priest who had studied glaciers in the Alps. The older priest had been known as the Glacier Priest, and he passed on his moniker to Father Hubbard. In this photo it says that Father Hubbard, a mountain climber all of his life and famous even in the European Alps, states that he feels safer on a cliff hundreds of feet high than he is in crossing Market Street in San Francisco. Father Hubbard was a Jesuit priest before the Jesuits went insane. He was also an explorer, an artist photographer, and head of the Department of Geology at the University of Santa Clara. In 1928, he traveled to Alaska and discovered an immense glacier that had been covered by ashes of a volcano that had erupted 16 years earlier. Here's a photograph that Father Hubbard took on the expedition. These mountains are between 5,000 and 6,000 feet high. On the expedition, the priest-scientist carried in his heavy pack portable equipment for offering the sacrifice of the Mass each day. Also included in his party were Jack Kobe and Red Chisholm, a former football star and then turned full-fledged engineer. Father Hubbard took yearly expeditions, and they were fraught with peril. Here's a photograph of Ugak Bay. Among the beauty spots of the world may be listed Ugak Bay, to which the priest and his fellow adventurers were forced to flee for refuge in one instance. A fierce storm and a lack of food drove them from the interior of the island, and they doubled back on their tracks to the coast. In 1929, Father Hubbard traveled to Taku Glacier, which Father Hubbard had said was the remnant of the Ice Age that had covered Alaska and Canada. Though the fact that the glaciers covered much of North America is well known today, it was not in Father Hubbard's time. Here's a photograph showing Father Hubbard's path in exploring the Taku region. The expedition to the Taku was Father Hubbard's third year of glacial exploration in Alaska. On this one, though, he stayed through the winter. He decided to try to reach the top of the 14,000-foot Mount Shasta in the middle of the winter, which he had attempted the year before, but had to turn around at 11,000 feet when a blinding snowstorm had prevented him from reaching the peak. Here we see the first complete photograph ever taken of the previously inaccessible Katmai crater. This article says that this composite photo, which was made with over 100 successive photos, required brawn, endurance, and a quick wit, and an uncanny knowledge of the possibilities of a still camera. Here's a photo of Father Hubbard with one of his sled dogs. It says that this dog was part dog and part wolf. This is what the expedition party ate when rations ran short. Father Hubbard said, "We were hungry and ate our meal of the day, a bar of chocolate and a handful of raisins each. We quenched our thirst in a very unorthodox way by eating snow, but you can't afford to get sick in Alaska." Here's a photo taken by Father Hubbard that appeared in the Kansas City Times. In May of 1930, Father Hubbard left for another expedition, where he would again stay for the winter. In January of 1931, it says, "Father Hubbard, the Glacier Priest, who starts a lone dash to the Alaskan wilds in an effort to bring the full glory of the early Catholic missionaries to an outside world." By this time, Father Hubbard had become very famous. This article from an Alaskan newspaper says, "To Father Hubbard, Alaska is indebted. His exploration and research studies of her glaciers and volcanic craters in particular, and other natural wonders in general, have become world news. His exploitation, by means of lectures, motion pictures, and published articles, of her marvels have engendered a desire of countless people to come to her vast expanses of land and sea to view for themselves her unrivaled wonders, and in many instances these wishes for the realities will find means of fulfillment." In February of 1931, Father Hubbard had taken his dog team to Nulato. He was going to go to Kotzebue by dog sled, and he was then going to visit the Jesuit missions on the return trip. This trip was a 400-mile leg of a 1,600-mile journey. Father Hubbard's dog sled team consisted of 13 huskies. It was reported that the trail was experiencing the worst conditions it had seen in many years. The Fresno Bee reported that the Glacier Priest was victorious over death in the snow. Completely exhausted after battling death in many forms during a long mush over 600 miles of Alaska's worst winter trials, Father Hubbard, known as the Glacier Priest, is recuperating in Holy Cross. Details of the epic journey were received today. It is the first news of the noted priest and scientist since he left Nulato in the middle of February. His face was blackened and cracked by exposure until he was scarcely recognizable. The winner by a few days in a terrific race against the spring thaw, which would have made the trails impassable and marooned him in the Arctic wastes to die. Exhausted by a hazardous journey of more than 1,600 miles over Alaskan trails, Father Hubbard, the Glacier Priest of Santa Clara College, was recuperating at a mission on the Yukon River, according to a late news dispatch. Father Hubbard made plans to explore a crater which was believed to be the largest volcanic crater in the world. He expected to make the trip by airplane and attempt to land on a small lake in the center of the crater with the aid of pontoons. Here's the path that Father Hubbard hoped to take. However, there was a blinding storm in June which forced the plane down at Ugachik. Despite this, a few days later, Father Hubbard and his party were the first men ever to fly over the crater of the Aknayakchak volcano, but the flight was not uneventful. The suction of the cold air toward the hot crater 20 miles in circumference pulled the airplane toward the pit, and only a sudden dive away from the gaseous mouth saved the ship from plunging into the hole. Father Hubbard and 3 students then left the plane to scale Mount Aknayakchak. With improvised gas masks to aid them, a little party made up of the Santa Clara University professor and 3 students were somewhere on the tortuous slopes of the mountain. After the climb, the party returned and was going to take a second pass via airplane over the volcano. The world held its breath when it was reported that the Glacier Priest had gone missing. But fortunately, a couple days later, it was reported that Father Hubbard was safe and unharmed. But then the full story came out. Father Hubbard, the Glacier Priest, was safe Sunday after a hazardous ascent during the week of a Aknayakchak volcano and a subsequent flight to the peak in which his plane was forced down by a squall, and they were saved from being wrecked on the shore with great difficulty. The little party made up of Hubbard and 3 students left here on June 13th and spent several days climbing the volcano slopes. Plane trips to transfer equipment to the base of the mountain were begun and the near disaster occurred. With ashes from the volcano covering the slopes deeply, improvised skis were used near the summit of the climb. The volcano was still active, and slight earth tremors were felt in Shignet while the party was away. But that wasn't all of it. While climbing Mount Aknayakchak, Father Hubbard and the 3 students were chased into a crater where they found refuge from an enraged bear. According to Wikipedia, the party had to kill bears in self-defense. The crater was still active and made investigation hazardous, and it nearly caused the deaths of the explorers. Here's a photo of Father Hubbard exploring the smoldering volcano. This article in the Associated Press describes the journey like a descent into Hades as the explorers inspected new lava flows. Father Hubbard's exploits, which were described in secular papers, were also a mechanism for evangelism. In this article, we see a photo of Mass being said. It says, "Mass said by the Glacier Priest while members of the expedition kneel behind him." The picture shows Father Hubbard before the jagged bit of rock serving as an altar, only a few miles from the smoldering crater of a Aknayakchak volcano. Here's a photo of Father Hubbard planning his next trip into the wilds by plane and dog sled. But this expedition would prove even more hazardous than the others. Father Hubbard and his party were rescued near starvation after scaling the peaks of Mount Katmai. They were rescued after 2 weeks of isolation in the forbidding ice peaks of the mountain. They were rescued at Katmai Bay by a passing schooner called the Polar Bear. It was during the descent of Mount Katmai on the return to Katmai Beach that disaster overtook them. Ice in the Katmai River broke up suddenly and precipitated the party into the stream. Nearly all the equipment was lost, and it was with great difficulty that the men saved themselves and their valuable scientific data by wading and swimming through the rushing icy water. Suffering from exposure and hunger, the men waited vainly for the boat hired to meet them on April 12th, but the boat never appeared. In order to survive, the party was forced to eat some of the sled dogs. But undaunted, the intrepid explorer and companions were ready for new thrills after timely deliverance. Rescued after 2 weeks of isolation in the forbidding ice peaks of Mount Katmai, Father Bernard Hubbard and his 2 fellow explorers prepared for new adventures today in the name of science. So Father Hubbard and the 2 students then proceeded to successfully make the first descent of Mount Shashalden, a volcano at Unimak Island, which had an extremely active eruption 2 months earlier. They reached the summit of the 9,400-foot cone which was still emitting ashes and flowing lava 6 days earlier. Father Hubbard and his pilot made the unfortunate discovery of traces of several villages near the base of Shishaldin volcano that had been buried after the recent eruption. Then Father Hubbard and his pilot returned to Anakchak, and they landed again on the floor of the deep crater. As they left the crater, hot currents from the erupting vents in the Anakchak volcano crater literally lifted the pilot's plane out of the depths of the crater. Again, they had another harrowing experience with the airplane. The headline reads, Father Hubbard braved deadly fumes and scalding lava in the pit of the largest active volcano on Earth. The three fearless Americans flew into the fiery heart of the world's largest active volcano. They landed in the crater and explored for hours the gaseous and fire-spouting hollow, and then they made a perilous takeoff with lift supplied by the erupting mountain's jets of hot air currents. Aviation experts hailed the achievement as one of the most spectacular and thrilling in the history of flying. No other plane had ever been grounded in the mouth of an active volcano. As part of this exploration, the party learned that Alaskan brown bears had very strong teeth. Father Hubbard reported that the bears bit through gasoline cans stored near the volcano for use in the expedition's airplane. Stores of food were also destroyed. In the expedition, the group had discovered a new eruptive crater in the Anakchak volcano and 2 prehistoric unknown villages of the Aleutian Islands. Then it was reported that the Glacier Priest was back in the United States. He returned to San Francisco for a vacation. This snapshot from his expedition shows him being friendly with a giant sea lion. The Associated Press reported that the Glacier Priest was resting with his 2 Malamute dogs on his return from 5 months of exploration work among the Alaskan volcanoes. The dogs, Marge and Katmai, were being brought back with him after sharing many of his adventures. Here we see Father Hubbard preparing for his 7th consecutive year of exploration of volcanoes. Father Hubbard braved the Arctic perils annually for science. He plumbed the depths of the largest craters of the world. Some of them were first explored by him. In 1938, Father Hubbard undertook a 2,000-mile voyage in a walrus-skin canoe across Arctic waters to recreate Asiatic migrations to the North American continent during the last ice age. Father Hubbard died in 1962 from a stroke at the age of 73. He was fortunate to have not seen the horrors resulting from the Second Vatican Council. Over his career, he had led a total of 32 expeditions to Alaska. He was quoted as crediting his success to a strong back, a strong stomach, a dumb head, and a guardian angel. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back again within a week with another one. But in the meantime, please check out my Facebook page and my Twitter page. Every day I post additional content that you won't find on this YouTube channel. And also, please pray for the church.